My mother died on a Tuesday, which felt wrong in the way that only meaningless details can. She was the kind of woman who treated Tuesdays like a fresh start. New grocery list, new episode of whatever she was watching, new reason to call me and talk for 40 minutes about nothing in particular. Tuesdays were hers. And then one Tuesday, they weren't anymore. She was 59. Healthy enough that her doctor had joked at her last checkup that she'd probably outlive the building. No history of cardiac disease, no warning signs, just a phone call from my stepfather at 6 in the morning, his voice too flat for someone who'd just lost his wife, telling me she was gone. Heart failure, he said, happened in her sleep. Peaceful, he added, like he was reading from a brochure. I drove 4 hours to get there. The whole ride I kept thinking about the last time I'd heard her voice, 3 weeks earlier, when she'd called me on a Wednesday instead of a Tuesday. I hadn't thought much of it then. Now I couldn't stop thinking about it. The funeral was held at a small chapel outside Knoxville. My mother had grown up in that town, raised me there for the first half of my life, and planted herself back there when she remarried 6 years ago. I stood in the second row, close enough to see the flowers on the casket but far enough from my stepfather and his son that I didn't have to make conversation. My stepfather, Raymond, stood at the front with his hand resting on the casket lid like he was claiming ownership of it. His son, Derek, stood slightly behind him, scanning the room in slow arcs. Not grieving, assessing. I'd met Derek maybe a dozen times over the years. He was 35, worked in real estate, smiled too easily at people he'd just met, and not at all at people he actually knew. My mother had tolerated him. She never said more than that, but when I'd asked once if she liked him, she'd paused just long enough before saying he was fine that I understood the pause was the real answer. After the service, when people were filing out and the casserole brigade had descended on the reception hall, a woman in a charcoal blazer cut through the crowd toward me with the focused energy of someone who didn't have time to waste. She was in her mid-50s, silver-streaked hair pulled back, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. She extended her hand. "Claire Weston," she said. "I'm the attorney who handled your mother's estate planning." I shook it. She knew my name before I gave it. That detail registered. "I've been trying to reach you," she said, keeping her voice low enough that the couple beside us couldn't hear. "Not by phone. I needed to see you in person first." I looked at her carefully. She didn't look like someone making small talk at a funeral. She looked like someone who had been carrying something heavy for longer than she wanted to. "Is there somewhere we can speak privately?" she asked. I glanced at Raymond across the room. He was laughing at something someone said. A short, easy laugh. The kind you only manage when you're not actually grieving. "Yes," I said. "Now works." She found an empty Sunday school room off the back hallway, small and smelling like construction paper and old hymnals. She closed the door and turned to face me. There was no preamble. "Your mother came to me 8 weeks ago," she said. "She wanted to update her estate documents." That's not unusual. What was unusual was how she arrived. She came alone, parked 2 blocks away, and asked me not to put the appointment in my digital calendar. She paid in cash. I felt something cold move through my chest. She said she suspected her husband was monitoring her accounts, her location, and possibly her phone. She said she had no proof yet, but she'd noticed small things. Discrepancies in their joint account, screenshots she hadn't taken, files she didn't remember opening. She wasn't sure what to do with the suspicion, but she wanted to get her documents in order before she figured it out. I kept my voice level. "What did she change?" "She designated you as the sole beneficiary of her life insurance policy. She also revised her will to leave you the house. Previously, it had been a split arrangement with Raymond. He didn't know? She specifically asked me not to send the updated documents to the house. I have them in my office safe. She also left something for you." Claire reached into the portfolio and produced a sealed envelope. My mother's handwriting on the front, just my first name, in the careful block letters she used when she meant something. She handed it to me and stepped back, giving me a moment I didn't entirely know what to do with. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single index card, the kind she kept in a kitchen drawer for grocery lists. 4 lines, no greeting. The blue binder in my closet, top shelf, behind the sweaters. The password is your grandmother's birthday backwards. I hope I'm wrong, but if you're reading this, I don't think I am. I read it twice. I folded it carefully and put it in my jacket pocket. "I need to see the house," I said. Claire nodded once. "I thought you might." I drove to the house before Raymond got back from the reception. I still had a key. My mother had given it to me years ago when she moved in, saying she wanted me to feel like I could walk through the door without asking permission. That small detail hit differently now. The house was quiet in the way houses get when someone is gone, not empty, just altered. I went straight to the bedroom, to the closet she kept meticulous and organized, her blouses on one side, her cardigans on the other, sweaters folded on the top shelf in color order. Behind the gray ones, pushed to the back, was a blue 3-ring binder. I carried it to the kitchen table and sat down. My mother was a retired bookkeeper. She understood numbers the way some people understand music, intuitively and precisely. The binder proved it. Inside were printed bank statements going back 14 months, each page with certain lines highlighted in yellow. Annotated in the margins in her handwriting. Questions, mostly. Who authorized this? This doesn't match. Raymond said this was the cable bill. It's not. There were pages from their joint account. Regular transfers, small amounts, $100 here, $200 there, always labeled something mundane. Household maintenance, utility adjustment, pet supplies. They didn't have a pet. Then she'd printed the actual vendor transactions. None of them matched the labels. The money was going somewhere else entirely. A checking account she'd traced to a partial account number she'd circled in red with one word next to it. Derek. There was a tabbed section near the back labeled medical. My mother had begun logging her symptoms starting about 5 months ago. Fatigue she couldn't explain. Nausea after meals at home, but not when she traveled. A headache that lasted 3 weeks, then vanished when she went to visit her sister in Charleston. Then returned the day she got back. She'd seen her doctor twice. Both times her results came back unremarkable. She'd written next to that word, underlined, but I don't feel unremarkable. The last entry in that section was dated 3 weeks before she died. One sentence, I think it's in the food. My hands were steady. I had learned years ago working in financial compliance that the moment you let your hands shake is the moment your judgment starts going with them. I turned to the last tab. Inside was a USB drive taped to the cardboard. I found my mother's old laptop in the guest room, plugged it in, and inserted the drive. It contained 2 things. A folder of photographs, date-stamped, showing her phone screen with text conversations she'd screenshotted, and a single audio file. I looked at the text screenshots first. They were messages between Raymond and Derek. My mother must have gotten into Raymond's phone at some point and photographed the screen. The messages went back 7 months. Most of them were logistical. Some were about money, but 3 of them, sent within a single week, made the kitchen feel smaller than it was. She's updating something with the lawyer. Need to move faster. Derek's response. How much longer? Raymond. I'm handling it. Stop asking. I put the laptop down and stepped outside to the back porch. The air was heavy and warm and the neighbor's dog was barking at something behind the fence. I stood there for 60 seconds and let my breathing even out. Then I went back inside and played the audio file. It was 43 seconds long. My mother's voice, quiet but deliberate, like someone speaking carefully into a recording device they weren't sure was working. If something happens to me, and it doesn't look like an accident, I want you to know that I am not sick. I have been made to feel sick. There is a difference. The binder has everything I was able to find. The rest is on this drive. I love you. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was scared of being wrong. I sat there after it ended, in the silence of her kitchen, in the house she had worked for 20 years to own, and I made exactly one decision. I was going to finish what she started. Claire had given me her direct number at the end of our conversation, telling me to use it if I found anything I didn't understand. I texted her from the car before driving away. Found the binder. Found the drive. I need to talk to someone official. Can you help me get to the right person? She responded in 4 minutes. I have a contact at the Financial Crimes Division of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. I've already sent them a preliminary note. They're expecting your call. I called from a gas station 2 miles from the house. The investigator's name was Agent Patrice Dunmore. She picked up on the second ring and spoke to me like someone who had been waiting for this particular call, not impatiently, but with the readiness of someone who already knew the shape of the situation. I want to hear everything, she said. Take your time. I walked her through the binder, the USB drive, the text screenshots, the audio recording. She asked questions that told me she was already familiar with this pattern. Slow financial transfers. Medical symptoms that appeared and disappeared based on location. Victims who didn't report because they weren't sure they had proof. The life insurance policy, she said. Do you know the value? $480,000, I said. My mother had told me years ago, casually, when she first took it out. A pause. And Raymond is the named beneficiary on the original policy? He was, I said. My mother changed it 8 weeks ago. Another pause, this one longer. She didn't know he didn't know, I said. That's significant, Dunmore replied. If he believed himself to still be the beneficiary, that's motive we can document. I need to know something, I said. Was she actually poisoned? Is there a way to find out? She was quiet for a moment. When someone dies unexpectedly, and no one requests an autopsy, it doesn't automatically happen. But if we open a formal inquiry, we can petition for a retrospective toxicology review. It takes time and it requires cooperation from the county medical examiner. How much time? Weeks, she said. Maybe less if the evidence supports expedited review. I told her about the symptom log. The pattern of feeling ill at home and recovering when she left. The entry about the food. Dunmore's voice shifted, not dramatically, but I noticed it. That's exactly the kind of documentation that supports the petition, she said. Can you bring the binder and the drive to my office tomorrow morning? I was there at 8. The office was smaller than I'd expected, a converted floor of a building downtown, fluorescent lights, and too much coffee smell. Dunmore met me at the elevator. She was in her 40s, precise and unhurried, the kind of person who made you feel that the situation was serious but not hopeless. She reviewed the binder page by page while I sat across from her and answered questions. She photographed each document, logged the drive into evidence, and had a tech analyst come in to mirror the contents within the first hour. By 10 o'clock, she'd pulled Derek's financial history and found the partial account number from my mother's notes. By 11, it had been confirmed. The account was in Derek's name. 14 months of small transfers from my parents' joint account had routed into it through a series of intermediate labels designed to look like regular household spending. She turned her monitor toward me. The total was just under $19,000. She was careful, Dunmore said. She documented the amounts and dates before they could be covered. My mother had been a bookkeeper for 30 years. Of course she was careful. The toxicology petition took 12 days. In that time, I stayed in a hotel 40 minutes from the house. Raymond called twice. I let both calls go to voicemail. He left messages that were careful and performed. He said he was worried about me. He said grief was hard and that he understood if I needed space. He said the house was there whenever I was ready to come back and pick up some of her things. I forwarded both voicemails to Dunmore. Derek called once. Left no message. I sent him a text. Not a good time. I'll reach out when I'm ready. Keeping it bland and closed. He replied with a single thumbs up. That small detail told me everything about how worried he wasn't. On day 13, Dunmore called me before 7 in the morning. The toxicology came back, she said. Your mother had elevated levels of a compound called thallium in her tissue samples. It's a heavy metal, odorless, tasteless, historically used in rat poison before it was banned for public sale. It causes cardiac arrhythmia when administered over a sustained period. Symptoms include fatigue, nausea, hair thinning, and neurological disruption. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and looked at the carpet. It would have taken months, she said quietly. Small doses, consistent exposure, and it would look like natural deterioration to anyone who wasn't specifically testing for it. I knew what she was telling me. My mother hadn't been wrong. She hadn't been paranoid. She had been right, and she had known she was right, and she had spent her last months trying to build the case that would prove it while the people feeding it to her kept telling her she just needed rest. Does this change the timeline? I asked. Yes, Dunmore said. We're moving to a full criminal investigation. I'm coordinating with the county prosecutor today. We're also getting a warrant for Raymond's home, his vehicle, and his financial accounts. Raymond and Derek, I said. Both, she confirmed. The warrant was executed on a Thursday. I wasn't there, but Dunmore called me afterward with a summary. They found 2 things in the house that mattered most. The first was a nearly empty container of thallium sulfate in a locked box in Raymond's garage, purchased online through a secondary account registered to a name that didn't exist at an address that turned out to be a vacant lot in Georgia. The second was a printed copy of my mother's original life insurance policy, with the beneficiary section highlighted in yellow. He thought he was still in it, Dunmore said. He didn't know she'd changed it, I said. He had no idea. That evening, Raymond and Derek were both taken in for questioning. Raymond was arrested on site. Derek was picked up at his apartment 2 hours later. I sat in the hotel room watching my phone and felt nothing dramatic. Just a quiet settling, like a room coming back into balance after something heavy had been removed from it. The arraignment was covered in the local news. I didn't watch the footage. I already knew what they looked like. Dunmore's office worked with the prosecutor over the following weeks to build the formal charges. Raymond faced first-degree murder, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and fraud. Derek faced conspiracy to commit financial exploitation, wire fraud, and accessory charges tied to the thallium purchase and the account transfers. Through it all, Raymond's attorney pushed a narrative that was almost impressive in its audacity. He claimed Raymond had no knowledge of any toxin. He suggested my mother's health had been declining in ways she hadn't disclosed. He implied the insurance policy change was evidence of a troubled marriage, not a protective measure. He tried to introduce testimony about my mother's stress levels at work before she retired. The prosecutor dismantled it piece by piece with the binder. My mother had been meticulous. Every entry dated, every amount cross-referenced, every symptom logged with time and location and what she had eaten. She had built her own case with the same quiet precision she used to bring to other people's finances, and she had done it while being slowly poisoned in her own kitchen, which made it one of the most remarkable documents I had ever read in a professional career spent reviewing fraud. I testified on the 4th day of trial. I had been in courtrooms before for compliance work, but never as a witness in a criminal case. The prosecutor walked me through the timeline, starting from the phone call the morning my mother died, through Claire's approach at the funeral, through finding the binder, through the audio file. When they played the audio file in the courtroom, the 43 seconds of my mother's voice, steady and careful and resigned, the woman in the jury's front row pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling for a moment. The man 2 seats down from her stared at his hands. Raymond stared at the table. I kept my eyes on the prosecutor and answered every question in the same tone I used in professional depositions. Measured, factual, precise. It wasn't because I didn't feel anything. It was because my mother had been precise and measured and professional while she was dying, and the least I could do was honor that. The defense attorney cross-examined me for 40 minutes and accomplished nothing. She asked whether my relationship with Raymond had been tense before my mother's death. I said it had been polite. She asked if I had any personal financial interest in the outcome. I said I had been named as a beneficiary, which was already in evidence, and that the existence of the policy had been known to me for years before my mother changed it. She asked if I could personally confirm my mother had not been confused or mistaken when she made her recordings. I said my mother had been a bookkeeper for 30 years with no history of cognitive impairment who had correctly identified a fraudulent account, cross-referenced 14 months of transactions, and produced a legally viable audio statement. She was not confused. The defense didn't follow up. Derek's attorney tried a different approach. He argued Derek hadn't known about the thallium. He'd only known about the financial transfers, which he claimed he believed were voluntary gifts from his father's wife. He painted Derek as a passive recipient, not an active participant. The prosecutor played 2 of the text messages. She's updating something with the lawyer. Need to move faster. And Raymond's response, I'm handling it. Stop asking. The jury was out for less than a day. Raymond was found guilty on all counts. The room stayed quiet for a moment after the first verdict, the way rooms do when something significant has actually happened and not everyone has processed it yet. Then the prosecutor exhaled through her nose, a small controlled release, and wrote something on her notepad. Derek was found guilty on the conspiracy and fraud charges. The accessory charge was reduced, but not dismissed. At sentencing, Raymond received 32 years. He would be 89 before he was eligible for parole, which the judge noted without commentary. Derek received 11 years plus restitution totaling more than the amount transferred, a number that included investigative costs and a penalty multiplier for the fraud structure. My mother's house passed to me, as the updated will directed. The life insurance policy paid as designated. Raymond's attorney challenged the policy change on the grounds that my mother had been under duress when she made it, which was possibly the most tone-deaf legal argument I had ever encountered, given that the duress in question had been created entirely by his client. The challenge was dismissed in 3 weeks. I went back to the house for the first time after sentencing. I stood in the kitchen for a while, not doing anything in particular, just being in the space she had made her own. She'd repainted the walls 2 summers ago, a soft green she'd picked out from a magazine photo and matched almost exactly. She'd hung a small print above the stove that said nothing clever, just had a picture of herbs and their names in clean typography. Basil, rosemary, thyme. I opened the kitchen window because she always kept it open in the afternoon. Claire called while I was still standing there. She asked how I was doing in the straightforward way of someone who actually wants to know. I told her the honest answer, which was that I wasn't sure yet. That I kept thinking about the 3 weeks between my mother's last call to me and the morning she died. That she had known something was wrong, had spent those weeks being careful and quiet and building a case, and had never once told me she was scared. She was protecting you, Claire said. She didn't want you in the middle of it until she had something solid. I know, I said. That's the hardest part, Claire said gently. Not the betrayal, the protection. She was right, it was. It sat in my chest in a way that grief usually doesn't, heavier than loss and quieter than anger. My mother had spent her last weeks being systematically harmed by people who lived in her house, and her response had been to document everything so methodically that justice had almost no choice but to follow. She hadn't waited for someone to save her. She had built the exit herself and handed me the map. I thought about what I would have done if Claire hadn't walked across that reception hall. If the envelope had never been left in a safe. If my mother had been less precise, less careful, less certain about the difference between being sick and being made sick. I thought about how many people don't have a binder. The house needed work. The back porch steps were rotting at the edges, something my mother had mentioned wanting to fix. The gutters needed clearing. The garden had gone mostly to weeds in the weeks since she died. I walked around it in the afternoon light and made a mental list. There was a lot to do. But I had time now, and I had the house, and the window was open, and somewhere under the weeds her rose bushes were still there. The ones she'd planted the first spring after she moved in. The ones she always said came back harder after a bad winter. I left the garden for the following weekend. I had what I needed to start, and I knew how to follow a trail to its end. My mother had made sure of that, not by telling me what to do, but by showing me line by line and date by date what it looked like to refuse to disappear quietly. I had followed every step she left, and the truth had moved because of it, not loudly or dramatically, but with the same steady, unhurried precision she had used her whole life to make things right.